My brother slept with my wife, and I found out. My mother defended him, demanded I forgive my wife and daughter unconditionally. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman I will call Lila. At the time, I was convinced she was the love of my life. We had been together for almost 5 years, and everything seemed to be going perfectly between us. We were both lawyers, with very busy lives, but we always found time to be together when we were not working. The year I proposed should have been the best of our lives. However, something unexpected happened. Lila lost her job. She was fired after they found out she had broken some company rules. I will not go into details about what happened because it is personal, but the company dismissed her rather abruptly for her actions. If you know someone who is a perfectionist and a workaholic, you will understand how devastating losing a job like that can be. For Lila, her job was not just a way to earn a living. It was part of who she was, her pride, and what gave her life meaning. Losing it so suddenly left her completely disoriented. Lila immediately started looking for a job, sending applications to countless companies and law firms. Unfortunately, her area of expertise was very specific, and there were not many opportunities available, especially considering how she had ended her previous job. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months without finding new employment. During all this time, I tried to support her as much as possible. I assured her that she did not have to worry about money. After all, we were engaged, and I felt it was my duty to take care of her during these difficult times. Knowing how much Lila tended to obsess over things and get stressed, I insisted that she take it easy and not let the situation consume her. To my relief, she followed my advice, or at least she tried. With all this free time, she decided to pursue something she had always wanted to do: learn pottery. She signed up for some local classes and started dedicating her free time to this new hobby. Coincidentally, my brother, Mason, also attended these same classes. Let me tell you a little about Mason. He is completely different from me. While I was the responsible and studious son who focused on his education, Mason was the typical rebel. He spent his school years messing around, getting into trouble, and earning a reputation as a carefree womanizer. This reputation followed him through college and beyond. He was the kind of person who never had a serious relationship and rarely took anything seriously. Lila had met Mason when we started dating and knew perfectly well what he was like. So when she started going to the same pottery classes as him, I thought it was just a coincidence that they met there. But looking back, that is when things started to change. In a matter of weeks, the two became surprisingly close. At first, I did not think much of it. Mason sometimes offered to drive Lila to and from classes, which seemed like a kind gesture, although unusual for him. Lila would come home and excitedly tell me about the things she and Mason had done in class, or she would show me the pieces they had worked on together. But then their relationship started to go beyond pottery. They began spending time together on weekends, going to art museums, or trying new restaurants. These were activities Lila and I used to do together, but now she was doing them with Mason. As time went on, I could not ignore the changes in Lila's behavior. She was spending much more time with Mason than I was comfortable with, and it was affecting our relationship. She even started canceling our dates to be with him. I am not one to stay quiet when something bothers me, so one night, I confronted her directly. I asked her point-blank if there was something between her and Mason. Lila was surprised by my question. She even seemed offended. She flatly denied that there was anything inappropriate between them. She assured me that her friendship with Mason was purely platonic, comparing it to spending time with a little brother. She seemed genuinely hurt that I would suggest anything else might be going on, and for a moment, I felt bad for doubting her. But deep down, her explanations did not entirely convince me. Everything blew up 2 months before our wedding. I was working nonstop at the time, trying to manage an intense workload to make sure we were financially secure since Lila had lost her job. I had taken on all the household expenses and the wedding we were planning. She still had not found a new job, and although she was using her savings for her personal expenses and emergencies, I was bearing the brunt of the costs. Between paying for everything and the stress of organizing our wedding, my hours at the office had become longer and more exhausting. I was not as present as I should have been, and looking back now, perhaps that gave Lila and Mason the opportunity to become as close as they did. One night, I came home early from a business trip. I wanted to surprise Lila and spend some quality time with her. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw my brother's car parked outside. Normally, I would not have been concerned, Mason had a habit of showing up unannounced. But this time was different. It was already past 9 p.m., and seeing his car there so late made me suspicious. As I unlocked the door and quietly entered, I could hear soft laughter coming from inside. The living room was empty, but the television was on, its flickering light casting shadows across the room. My eyes immediately fixed on the beer cans scattered on the floor, and then on Lila's clothes and underwear, carelessly strewn among them. My stomach churned. At that moment, I knew what I was going to find. Part of me wanted to turn around and leave, but another part, the one that needed irrefutable proof, pushed me forward. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I slowly walked toward the bedroom, my heart pounding. I stopped at the entrance, and there they were, Lila and Mason, together in the most intimate way possible. They were so absorbed in each other that they did not even notice I was there. I am normally a calm and collected person, but this was an unforgivable betrayal. My fiancée, the woman I was supposed to marry in 2 months, was in bed with my own brother. Without saying a word, I entered the room, walked over to the bed, and grabbed Mason by the neck. I pulled him away from Lila, and the surprise on his face was almost satisfying. He turned to look at me, and his expression instantly changed from confusion to terror. I did not even look at Lila. Mason stumbled, immediately starting to apologize, but his words meant nothing to me at that moment. I punched him straight in the nose. The crunch of bone gave me a grim satisfaction as blood began to pour down his face. He screamed in pain, but I was not done. I hit him again and again, each punch harder than the last. Blood dripped from his nose onto his shirt, but I did not care. He weakly tried to defend himself, but I kept hitting him. After Mason was on the floor, bleeding and begging me to stop, I turned to Lila. She was sitting on the bed, trembling and crying. I looked her straight in the eye and told her, in a cold, controlled voice, that she had 10 minutes to get out of my house. If she did not, I warned her that I would not hesitate to leave her as bloody as my brother. She began to beg me, apologizing over and over again. She told me that she could explain and pleaded with me not to kick her out, to give her a chance to fix things. But I was not interested in her excuses or apologies. I looked at my watch and said curtly, "You have 9 minutes left." The tone of my voice and the look in my eyes must have convinced her that I was serious, because she quickly got out of bed and began to dress with trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face as she pulled a suitcase out of the closet and stuffed whatever she could into it. When she finally finished packing and was dragging her half-full suitcase down the stairs, she turned to me one last time. In a broken voice, she begged me to listen to her, saying that she loved me and that she deserved a chance to explain. Without a word, I took her hand, removed the engagement ring from her finger, and pushed her toward the door. She tried to resist, begging me to reconsider, but I was done. I opened the door and shoved her outside. She stumbled on the porch, still crying and screaming for forgiveness. I did not even look back as I slammed the door in her face. Her sobs faded away on the other side. Mason's face was still bloody from our fight, and although I was still boiling with rage, I did not want to be responsible if something worse happened to him. I called my parents and told them everything that had happened. My father was furious with Mason, and my mother was in shock, but they both said they would come immediately. When they arrived, my mother, who is a nurse, took care of Mason's injuries. She cleaned and bandaged his wounds, which, luckily for him, were mostly superficial. Meanwhile, my father took me to the backyard, away from Mason. He could see that my hands were still shaking with rage and that I was barely controlling myself. A while later, Mason came out with my mother. His face was bruised, his nose bandaged, and there were still bloodstains on his shirt. He apologized for betraying me, saying that he had not wanted things to happen this way. But then he dropped the bomb. He said he was in love with Lila. I finally turned to look at him, my eyes like daggers. He continued to explain that he believed Lila felt the same way about him. He claimed that this was the first time they had been together, as if that made it any less serious. Then he pulled out his phone and showed me their messages. Conversations filled with flirty, secret messages, and Lila confessing how unhappy she was in our relationship. According to Mason, she had invited him to stay that night, thinking that I would still be on my business trip. As I read those messages, my rage resurfaced. Mason kept talking, saying that he was sorry for betraying me, but he also insisted that he had never felt this way about anyone before. He said he could not help it and begged me to forgive him. His words were like daggers twisting in the wound. My father, who had been listening silently, finally had enough. He scolded Mason harshly, telling him how much he had hurt me and how ashamed he should be of himself. But my mother's reaction was different. Mason had always been her favorite, and I could see her struggling with the situation. Mom began to tell me that regardless of what I decided to do with Lila, I needed to forgive my brother. She said he seemed truly remorseful, as if that somehow lessened his betrayal. I could not believe what I was hearing. I interrupted her and told my parents that I was not in the mood for sermons or advice. The only thing I wanted at that moment was for them to take Mason and leave. I could not stand to look at him for another second. My father nodded, understanding that I needed space, and helped Mason to the car. My mother hesitated, clearly wanting to stay and mediate, but finally followed. In the following weeks, I was still processing the emotional impact of Lila's betrayal. She had been constantly messaging me during those weeks, begging for forgiveness and trying to explain herself. But her explanations were always the same tired excuses, very similar to what Mason had already told me. She claimed that she and Mason had never meant to hurt me. I had practically ignored all of her messages during those weeks. Then, suddenly, I received a call from Mason. He told me that he and Lila had just discovered that she was pregnant and the baby was his. He told me that since she was carrying his child, he wanted to marry her, and he wanted my blessing. I could not believe Mason had the nerve to ask me this after how they had both betrayed me. My mother's reaction only made things worse. She had already been trying to make peace between Mason and me, but now she saw Lila's pregnancy as a sign from heaven. She told me it was God's plan that Lila got pregnant, just like that, and that maybe Mason and Lila were always meant to be together. Her words stung like a slap in the face. It was as if she was trying to justify the unforgivable just because now she could fulfill her dream of being a grandmother. I told my mother clearly that I knew exactly what she was doing, and that if she decided to side with Mason and Lila, our relationship was over. I was not kidding. It was bad enough that my brother had betrayed me, but for my own mother to support them was something I could not accept. My father tried to remain neutral, perhaps thinking it would help calm the situation. Meanwhile, my mother offered Lila financial help, assuring her that she and the baby would be well taken care of. But of course, there was a condition. My mother insisted that she and Mason had to get married. This was exactly what Mason wanted. Mom would not budge in her quest to get this wedding, refusing even to consider her grandson being born out of wedlock. When I found out that Mason and Lila were actually going to get married and had started sending wedding invitations to our family, I felt furious and humiliated. Without further discussion, I kept my word and cut off contact with my mother and brother. However, my mother is not one to give up easily. For weeks after the breakup, she kept calling, leaving voicemails, and even showing up unannounced at my door, trying to guilt me into reconciling with them. It was overwhelming. That is when I realized that the only way to escape her was to move away. It has been 3 years since I abandoned my former life and moved to a new city, cutting ties with almost all of my family except for my father. He understood why I needed to leave and respected my decision, even though he was saddened that I no longer visited him. During these 3 years, I rebuilt my life, step by step. I did not share my new phone number with anyone except my father. I made new friends, found a new normal, and worked hard to put the past behind me. So imagine my surprise when, yesterday, I found Lila at my door, ringing the doorbell. When I opened it, I almost did not recognize her. She looked nothing like the woman I had once loved. She was wearing worn and old clothes. Her face was pale and gaunt. Her hair looked thin and unkempt. She was standing there, holding the hand of a little girl who could not have been more than 2 or 3 years old. The girl had Mason's strong features and an undeniable resemblance that gave him away as her father. For a moment, I was speechless. My mind was racing with questions. Why was she here? How had she found me? What did she want? The years I had spent trying to forget her and the pain she had caused me seemed to come flooding back. Finally, I broke the silence. Lila, what are you doing here? Her eyes filled with tears, and in a trembling voice, she asked me if she could come in, as she had something important to discuss with me. My first impulse was to say no and ask them to leave. But then I looked at the little girl beside her, who was looking at me with big, innocent eyes. I could not be rude in front of the child, so I stepped aside and invited them in. I led them to the couch and offered them water. Once they were settled, I sat across from them and asked them what they were doing here. I already knew that she would not have found me on her own. I had not given my address to anyone except my father, and I trusted that he would not share it unless it was really important. So what was so important that he would reveal where I lived? Instead of answering directly, Lila pulled an envelope out of her purse. She gave it to me without saying a word. I opened it and immediately recognized my mother's handwriting. My stomach churned as I read the letter. My mother wrote bluntly that it was my responsibility to fix the mess Mason had created. She explained how Lila and Jesse were struggling, how Mason had abandoned them, and how, being Mason's brother and Jesse's uncle, I should take care of them now. I looked up at Lila, confused and angry. "What does this mean?" I asked, holding the letter. That is when Lila broke down and started telling me the whole story. According to her, Mason had never been faithful to her from the beginning of their marriage. Even after Lila gave birth to their daughter, Jessie, my brother continued to have affairs throughout their time together. Lila had tried to make things work, hoping they would get better over time, for Jessie's sake, if nothing else. But 3 months ago, Mason had packed his bags and left without a word. No explanation, no note, no warning. He simply disappeared. Since then, Lila had been alone. She had no job, no savings, no home. She and Mason had lived in a rented place, and without him, she could not afford to keep paying the rent. My mother, feeling some obligation to Jessie, had been giving Lila money to support them. But now, with Mason practically gone, my mother had decided that she no longer wanted to be responsible for Lila and her daughter. Lila explained to me that my mother wanted me to take care of her and Jessie since they had nowhere to go and no one else to turn to. I felt completely outraged by what she was asking of me and how absurd it was that both she and my mother expected me to help them. Not only had my mother sided with Mason during the initial betrayal, but now she was trying to burden me with the consequences of their actions. It was outrageous, but it did not surprise me. My mother's blind favoritism towards Mason had always prevented her from seeing the damage he caused. I told Lila directly, even in front of her daughter, that she had no right to expect help from me. That is, this was not my daughter. She was no longer my fiancée, and this was clearly not my responsibility. Although I felt bad that Mason had abandoned them, she should have seen it coming. After all, he had never been a reliable person. Anyway, I was not going to let them guilt me into helping them. So I asked Lila to leave. She started crying, saying that she had nowhere to go, no money, and that what she had left, she had spent on gas to come see me. I ended up giving her a few $100s before asking her to leave. Since then, although I know I did the right thing, I cannot help but feel a little guilty. I feel sorry for that poor girl. So, am I doing wrong? Update 1. I need to clarify some things. I do not understand my mother's behavior in this situation at all. I find it very selfish that she is trying to make me feel guilty for helping Lila and her daughter after everything that happened. I understand that she is worried about her granddaughter, but she should not expect me to fix her son's problems, especially after how she completely ignored how I felt and defended Mason throughout the entire betrayal. Her request is totally out of line. Those who say that my father also failed me are right. Instead of supporting me after the infidelity, he remained neutral. Although he scolded my brother that time, he never really sided with me in confronting my mother's manipulative behavior. He was also part of this betrayal. I plan to talk to him about this soon. Mason may have left Lila, but that does not mean I have to take care of her. She made her choices, and although I feel some pity for her given the situation, I do not owe her anything. The fact that she came to my house with nothing but a sad story and a child only shows how desperate she is. What I did telling Lila to leave and giving her some money, but not offering to help further, was setting boundaries. I did not reject her out of spite. I simply made it clear that it is not my responsibility to fix what Mason messed up. I have no obligation to take care of her just because she is having a hard time now. No, that little girl is definitely not mine. Lila and I had already broken up weeks before she got pregnant, and by the time we broke up, we had not been intimate for a while. The timeline is clear, and there is no possibility that I am the father. Besides, Jessie is identical to Mason. Her face, her eyes, her smile. It is like seeing my brother as a child. I have no doubt that Mason is her father. I do not need to do any paternity test because the resemblance is unmistakable. The girl is clearly his, and I will not let them involve me in any more confusion. No, I do not want to adopt my niece. I cannot believe some are suggesting this. Regardless of Lila's financial or emotional situation, she is the mother, and it is her responsibility. I do not understand why she never worked after getting married or why she did not save any money. Mason is the father, so even if they separate, both Lila and Mason have to take responsibility and care for their daughter. Mason is obligated to pay child support. Update 2. I talked to my parents about all of this. I already knew my father had given Lila my address, but I wanted to hear it directly from him. I called him and asked him point-blank why he gave her my location after I had asked him so many times not to, and what he expected me to do for Lila and her daughter after all these years. My father was silent for a moment, visibly uncomfortable. Then he sighed deeply and apologized. "I am so sorry, son, truly," he said in a remorseful voice. "We have tried to help Lila as much as possible, but with Mason absent for so long, we could only do so much. Your mother begged me to give you her address. She said that maybe if you saw her after all this time, you would want to help her somehow, and she has nowhere else to go." I felt my frustration growing and asked him why he thought I would help someone like her. "She betrayed me with Mason, hurt me, and now you want me to help her?" I said. My father replied that he understood why I was upset. He explained that neither he nor my mother wanted things to end up like this, but Lila and Jesse were also family. He believed I was their only option. He apologized to me, but I did not want to hear it. I told him our relationship was over. I had trusted him to be different from my mother, but it turned out they were all equally treacherous. Did they really think I was going to forget the past and welcome Lila and my brother's daughter into my life and start taking care of them? It was clear that my parents did not care about me at all. I told my father, clearly and firmly, that he should forget my number and pretend I did not exist. Since he knew my address, I warned him that if he or my mother ever showed up at my house, I would call the police. My father tried to apologize again, begging me to listen to him, but I was no longer interested. My voice did not tremble as I spoke, though the weight of the words hung in the air. "Do not call me again," I said, cutting him off. "Just do not. You made your choices, and I am making mine." Without waiting for his response, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked his number. What my father did is unforgivable, and there is no going back. Update 3. It has been almost a month since my last update. I finally managed to find Mason with the help of a friend. It turns out Lila was right. Mason has been living with his latest fling a few towns away, pretending he has no responsibilities, as if he had no family. I cannot believe it is the same person who told me seriously that he was in love with Lila 3 years ago, the same one who turned my life upside down, and now, after all that, he was living with another person, acting like he had not abandoned his wife and daughter. It was frustrating, even maddening. How could someone be so selfish, so insensitive? It sickened me that he could be so carefree about it, as if abandoning his own flesh and blood was something trivial. After finding out where he was, I sent the address to Lila. I did not want to get involved in their problems anymore, but I also did not want her to feel completely helpless. So I gave her one last piece of advice. You need to find a lawyer and file for divorce and child support. Do it now, before Mason disappears to another place. I also sent her some money, enough for her to get by for a while. Lila thanked me for everything, and I could hear the relief in her voice. She apologized again, as she had done so many times before, but I did not want to hear it anymore. "This is over," I wrote to her. "Do not ever contact me again. Do not show up at my house. This is the last favor I do for you. What we had, whatever it was, ended a long time ago. I just wanted her to leave me alone once and for all."